Well, we wanted to do something interesting at the start of 2025 here in terms of like how fans are consuming their media these days. And we turned to NRG Research, one of the leading firms out there, for a custom study alongside SBJ looking at changing dynamic of sports interest and engagement. And here to help us break it all down is Jay Kaufman. He's the executive vice president and head of sports at NRG. He was a long-time media expert and head of media research at the NBA alongside David Stern and others. Jay, really appreciate you joining the pod this week.
Thanks, Austin. Really excited to be here, and congrats on all the success that you, Molly, and team have had so far too.
Appreciate it, man. That was a long intro. That was like a Rocky-like intro with all the names and titles in there. I was impressed with myself.
Big shoes to fill based on some of the other guests you've had. So
you're my Apollo Creed this week, so let's do this.
Fair enough.
Jay, based on the information that you saw in the study, like where are fans consuming their live sports these days?
So, Austin, linear TV is still the dominant medium that we're seeing, especially among older fans. But the percentage of sports fans that watch live games through traditional TV on a weekly basis has actually dropped about 10%, 10 percentage points since 2022. And that's pretty substantial. It's still at around 70%, but that's a significant drop. And so during that same time period, streaming, through the TV is up about 8 percentage points. And streaming through other devices is also up 5 to 7 percentage points. So millennials and Gen Z, have officially become streaming first when it comes to live sports, which is probably not shocking, but we've officially crossed that threshold at this point. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how those trends continue. The other thing that was really fascinating to see, and it's interesting and potentially scary trend, and I think it's probably been on the mind for some folks for a little while, is around piracy. And so, 29% of sports fans and 42% of avid sports fans say that they watch live sports on a weekly basis via a pirated stream. And more than half of fans under 35 say that they regularly watch sports through unauthorized streams rather than pay for new services. So obviously something that will be top of mind, I think, and should be top of mind for especially the streamers in the sports world.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing new. Pirating, sports telecast has been going on since probably the dawn of TV. But do you think that that's just anecdotally, like in response to there being now so many apps that you have to get live sports these days?
The number of apps and the total spend that you need to watch all the games you want is definitely a driving force. And I think the interesting decision that the fan has to make is between kind of quality and latency versus price. And a lot of what we're seeing is that they're willing to take a little less quality, kind of risk some of the stuff that goes along with kind of online streams because the cost associated, especially for one-off games here and there, is too much for them.
No, my Napster days are over. I'm paying for the app.
Oh, see, I was a LimeWire kid. Jay, I am not one of those who has pirated a game, but I am one of those streaming first millennials. So who would you say has benefited the most from the migration to streaming? Obviously, we're seeing lots of entrants into the space now. That's Prime Video, Netflix, Peacock. Who are the winners here?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of parties that are seeing benefits. And first and foremost, it's fans, right? I think fans generally feel very positively about streaming. That's typically driven by innovations to the telecast and kind of increased access to more events. Leagues obviously, are using streaming. You've seen it in some recent rights deals, and I think you'll continue to see that they're using it as kind of a way to diversify how they reach their fan base and kind of be on the platforms that their fans are on. But I think from a media perspective, there's definitely a few standouts. Prime Video is one that really stood out in the study that we conducted. 37% of sports fans have watched live sports on Prime Video in the past 3 months, and this is data that we actually have trended over time. So Prime Video ranked first overall, and that's about 10 percentage points up just from the middle of 2022. So pretty significant, obviously being driven by the Thursday Night Football, but really impressive growth there. It's really interesting that the growth on Prime Video over that time is actually being driven by boomers, which is maybe be counterintuitive to what people think. But boomers have nearly doubled their usage of the service for live sports since 2022.
And they love NFL, and that's the biggest sport on there.
Well, and I think it's awareness too, right? In 2022, boomers wouldn't necessarily know where their Thursday Night Football went. Now, over the last few years, Amazon's kind of created this it's destination viewing.
That's right. And if you want to watch the biggest programming on sports, which the NFL is, like, you have to figure it out. And I think the older generation probably a little slower to figure it out, but they've come around.
I was interested to see the Peacock data. Tell us about that.
Peacock and kind of YouTube TV were the other two that stood out. Peacock was up 8 percentage points during that same time period, and YouTube TV was up 7% percentage points. Both significant growth. And again, both have kind of the NFL piece in common. And when you start thinking about exclusive games on the networks and kind of being the place that you need to go to watch some of these big playoff games and in the Peacock case, and Sunday Ticket obviously on the YouTube TV side, they're both kind of rising to the top pretty quickly. And ESPN Plus is still right at the top as well. Probably not a shock to most folks, but in general, when we did this, when we first started doing this a few years ago, there weren't many platforms that had were above that 25% threshold of folks kind of watching regularly live sports on their platforms. And now there's a handful that are broken through, and I think it's only going to continue to grow.
Well, I know Molly has written about it, and Rick Cordell, the head of NBC Sports, talked about it. Like you mentioned, that NFL game on Peacock, and that has driven so much of what they've done with the strategy on that platform. And it led them, the success of that NFL game, to go ahead and all right, we're going to acquire a big tonnage of NBA games for that deal that's starting next season. So very interesting to see on the Peacock front. And this time next year, I want to see how Flagship's doing. I want to see what the fan response is to Flagship when that product gets launched in the fall from ESPN.
Absolutely. We'll be tracking it.
All right, Jay. How did fans in the study feel about Netflix's performance with its first doubleheader of NFL games?
Austin, obviously there were some challenges that fans brought to life after the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight, and a lot of attention was on the Christmas games.
You're putting it very nicely. The fan response to that debacle of streaming during that fight.
Fair enough, but
my words, definitely my words.
Yeah, that was Austin. The Christmas Day games, and then into the launch of Raw was certainly top of mind for fans, just how Netflix was going to perform, and the answer was overwhelmingly positive with the Christmas game. So we kind of tracked sentiment and some open ends and some general responses, and just about 58% of the responses were that kind of dealt with production and streaming quality and that type of stuff for the Christmas games were positive. About 14% had kind of mixed results. Some things working better than others, and 28% were negative. So considering where they were back at that fight, I mean, that's pretty substantial growth, and I think demonstrates that kind of Netflix is moving in the right direction.
I got to give him credit. We talked to Brian Rolap at our media conference in the fall, like right after that fight happened, and all the questions were about like, are you talking to Netflix? Are you worried at all about the production for these NFL games? And he was cool as a cucumber. He said, no, we've been in touch. They're going to nail it. Obviously, the audience was maybe a little smaller globally for these NFL games, but he was right. He was right on, and Netflix got it right. They got it right during Raw, so I got to give credit to the technology department over there at Netflix for nailing the streaming for those latter events.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in terms of Netflix as a whole, we kind of track their different networks and platforms perception as kind of live content offers, and what we've seen is dramatic increases in kind of Netflix being perceived as a service that offers live sports and live content, and that actually is hit multiple new highs. We track some of that stuff on a weekly basis through some of our syndicated tools, and that continues to rise, and it's now at 22%, which is pretty significant considering they have not been in live entertainment for very long.
Well, I can say I was 100% positive on the Beyonce Bowl. So last week we had Katie Daly from ESPN on the podcast, who talked a lot about ESPN's social strategy and how to reach younger fans. What data are you seeing? How are these younger fans consuming sports content?
First and foremost, I think what we've seen is kind of dispelling the rumor that younger people are less interested in sports in general. Like it's not the case when we look at kind of top box interest in sports. When we look at the percentage of shared content time that sports accounts for, it's equal to, and in some cases more so for fans under 35 than over 35. But clearly they are engaging in different ways. And so while live games are still driving most of the engagement for sports fans, regardless of age, there are some other trends that are kind of standing out. Sports fans under 25 are nearly 3 times as likely than as those 25 and plus to say that they prefer watching non-game content to live games. That's, there's still relatively low percentages, but that's something to keep in mind that, that's kind of where they're going with that. 57% of sports fans under 35 say that the amount of highlights available on social media makes it less necessary to watch every live game. So something else that the rights holders need to be considering. Social media, podcasts, video games, sports betting are all becoming far greater entry points for younger fans. Kind of 35 is that key age break. And so the live games are still kind of at the center of engagement, but all of these other touch points, especially entry points to fandom, are becoming more and more popular. And so whether it's these highlights or other touch points, I think the key for everybody is figuring out how they can be additive and not cannibalize or kind of replace the live game experience.
Jay, you mentioned sports betting. When PASPA fell 6+ years ago, the dominant hypothesis at the time was like, as this spreads, as more states legalize sports betting, it's going to really help viewing, it's going to help fandom. What did your study show as far as sports betting working as a catalyst for fandom?
It's interesting. And I've been on the other side trying to kind of prove that causation, and it's pretty hard when you're looking at Nielsen data and behavioral data because there's so many variables, and you know better than anybody that can be a challenge. But I think what we've certainly seen from some of the studies that we've done is that betting increases engagement with sports, and it also kind of expands or broadens the number of sports or the number of games that fans are interested in and interested in watching. 43% of sports fans say that they watch more sports on TV as a result of legalized betting. And once they bet on a game, like a specific game, the vast majority, it's somewhere between 70 and 80%, depending on the study, tune into that game and watch for longer. So, what it's doing from an engagement perspective is bringing people into new sports, having them tune into games that maybe don't include their favorite teams or their favorite players that they otherwise wouldn't be watching. And then once they're in, and that the time spent metric is obviously very important to folks. It's increasing that time spent. And so, we know that one of the other interesting data points that we had was that nearly half of sports fans say that they've begun following a completely new sport over the past couple of years. And when we dove into why that was the case or what was kind of the key driver, sports betting was right at the top, especially among those younger fans under 35. When you look at what ESPN's doing with kind of their ESPN bet account linking and and some of that stuff, I think it's going to end up being a great case study for how betting gets integrated across like the broader sports ecosystem and adds value for the fans and kind of increases that engagement across the board.
And while I have never bet on a sport officially, because I'm afraid that
Not yet, Molly.
I'm afraid that once I start,
no betting yet.
I'm afraid once I start, I won't stop. I have found my I do a lot of fantasy, and we've got money in the fantasy league, and it's true. I'll watch a game that I usually wouldn't care about because I don't know. I have a wide receiver on some random team. So you bring up ESPN, and we've talked about how younger fans consume, but where in general are sports fans getting their content now? We've got all these different platforms: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, ESPN. Linear platforms, though. TikTok might go away. For my sake, I really need those dog videos. I hope it doesn't. But what's the data showing you?
So ESPN's still the number one source of sports content for fans, especially older fans. It's still right at the top for younger fans as well. But we definitely see a clear delineation based on age again on the types of platforms that people are turning to for their content. So for younger fans, overall, YouTube now ranks as number 2 in terms of like where people go for sports content, and I'm confident that wasn't the case a number of years ago. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and to a little lesser extent Reddit kind of pop in terms of places where younger fans are going to, like that they're preferred places for them to go to get their sports content. While interestingly, some of the more traditional sites, ESPN, Fox, kind of the NBCs and the CBSs of the world are still where older fans go to consume their sports. So it's fascinating to see if when you kind of look at that under 35 over 35 split, there are some very stark differences.
All right, Jay, we're going to get you out of here on this. You had some interesting data in a study about just the role that sports is playing in society. What were some of those key data points that stood out to you?
I think everybody talks a lot about the value of sports from a business or a media perspective, but I think we sometimes overlook the importance that sports plays in society as a whole. And I think especially during challenging or divisive times, sports certainly provides kind of much needed escapism and the opportunity to kind of bring people together. And so we've been kind of tracking that for a while as well. And so there are a few really interesting things. So 7 out of 10 sports fans say that no matter what is going on in their world, watching sports makes them feel better. So that speaks to that escapism piece. A really interesting one that sounds like it's not a big deal, especially considering when how harsh rivalries can be in sports and some of the rhetoric that goes around. Nearly 3/4 of sports fans say that sports is a safe topic of conversation when meeting new people. And I think, politics was not on that list. Like there's a lot of things that, are challenges for people when socializing. And, I think people are a little bit on edge. And I think the fact that sports can kind of be that, the thing that brings people together and kind of starts some of those conversations is really important. We've tracked a lot of spending data, based on kind of the economy and other things. And what was really interesting is that when we asked, about 3/4 of sports fans say that they've cut back on spending because of kind of rising costs and prices and just general economic situations. But when we dove in a little deeper and asked them where they were most likely to cut back on, things like sports packages or cable packages or streaming services or tickets or merch were consistently at the bottom of the list. And so, below things like clothing or groceries or alcohol. And so, pretty telling based on that, the role that sports plays in people's lives and the importance that it holds there. And so, and the final thing that goes along that, and it's a little bit more of a businessy piece, but like with all of the streaming services and subscription services that are out there and competing for entertainment, one of the things that we've seen is that sports is critical in their decision making in terms of what they subscribe to, and 84% of sports fans say that sports content factors in to their decision to subscribe to an entertainment service, and nearly half say it's a major factor. So it's clear that there are emotional ties to sports that people have, and we saw it a bit during the pandemic. But when sports isn't around, it definitely leaves a hole in people's hearts and sports fans' hearts. So that role in society is something that we continue to monitor pretty closely.
Well, a big shout out to National Research Group for putting this study together. If you haven't checked out their work, give it a look for sports, Hollywood, a whole bunch of other sectors, industry leaders in this research. Jay Kaufman, Executive Vice President and Head of Sports at NRG, appreciate you breaking it all down for us this week.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Austin, and good luck with everything moving forward.